What's up, folks? I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews. In this case, though, we are doing some My Sketchy Goodness with Keith Grachow once again. Keith, great to have you again.
Yeah, it's been like I've been a guest like all week.
Yeah, actually, you have been a busy man. So, yes, for those tuning in who have never seen My Sketchy Goodness, this is an hour-long show where Keith and I talk about primarily, I'll say, illustration, doodling, comics, art. We may dive into life. We may dive into other subjects of interest, whatever sort of happens. And that way we can basically have fun. So, Keith, you've already, I can see you're working on something. Can I bring it up for the wonderful people out there?
Yeah, sure. I'm just doodling.
Love
Honestly,
it.
I had no idea. I was thinking about, I'm like, do I do what I did last time, which is I had something pre-done? Do I do something that I'm working on? But I just ultimately decided I'm going to doodle. So it's kind of looking a little bit like another man thing.
Nothing wrong with that.
There we go. Yeah, man thing's always just a lot of fun, as I had mentioned before, because of the organic quality. There's a lot of room for fun, error, and mistakes to be made that make it look really cool, right? So,
well, you know what? Here's a question. I'm familiar with Swamp Thing, which I have 1, 2 thanks to you, and a third over here on my wall. I actually don't know much about Man Thing. I understand that he's from Marvel, that he's basically a plant-based swamp creature. But beyond that, I actually don't know about him. What's your connection to the creature, to the character, to the man, whatever it is? And what is the character's actual backstory? I want to hear about this thing.
So I can't really, I don't think I have a really good answer for this. I can't say that I have a lot of information, knowledge in regards to the Man Thing. What I can say is, I believe one of the most distinct memories I have of reading a comic with Man Thing was when Liam Sharp was on the Incredible Hulk in the early-ish 90s, early to mid 90s.
Okay.
And his Man Thing was just always just super cool. I mean, his Incredible Hulk was like muscle upon muscle. Just, I always loved the detail that Liam put into the artwork he always was involved with. Yeah, so that there was I think there was a couple of issues with the Man Thing, but I think that I think the other one below it, that one right there is another one.
Wow,
it's something, exactly. Just something about the way he drew it and these organic qualities of the creature are really fun to draw. I'm not sure who created. I'd like to think it was in the 70s with like maybe is it Steve Gerber or somebody, the same one who did Howard the Duck, or am I just misremembering that?
I mean, according to Wikipedia, first appearance of Man Thing is Savage Tales #1 in 71 in May, and it's stating created by Stan Lee, Roy Thomas. I don't know if it's. I think it's Jerry Conway and Gray Morrow.
Okay. So yeah, again, I fully admit I don't know that much about the origin of the character. What now? I guess a good question to ask, and I'm sure like Mike Ruth would know this answer, but who came first? Was it Swamp Thing or Man Thing?
Oh, now we're. Oh, I'm gonna be on a Google rabbit hole, aren't I? and again, according to Wikipedia, Swamp Thing, first appearance, the House of Secrets, July of 71.
Wow.
So 2 months apart. So Man Thing comes out in May, and then July, House of Secrets number 92 comes out with Swamp Thing. Although I would be interested to know if that's actually true because of the way the comics publicates and dates their work. Because isn't it normally like if it states May, it probably actually came out like April or something?
Yeah, it's always very interesting that there seems to be some healthy rivalry between Marvel and DC. I remember as a young person thinking that, like, you know, one company would come out with a certain kind of character that became very popular, and then all of a sudden the other company would do the same. You know, you've got your Deadpool and your Deathstroke and, you know, things like that. You've got the Justice League and the Avengers, right? Like those similar. Well, and of course, then the Squadron Supreme that Marvel was completely aping from the Justice League, right? Like characters that were pretty much just exact, you know, like almost exactly like what you would the Batman version, the Wonder Woman version of those Marvel characters, right?
Yeah, exactly. I find it fascinating to a degree, in so many different ways when you have the companies doing that, where like clearly there are copycat characters, and it's like, well, all right, you've changed enough that it's like legally fine. And just seeing how those characters have changed, but also like the legality and like the fan reaction to all of that is so fun.
Well, it is interesting how you have Man Thing and Swamp Thing coming out so closely, and what's the, you know, did one were there artists or creators or writers, editors at, you know, one company seeing what the other was doing and like, ooh, let's do this?
Yeah.
Or was there going to be like, let's see, trying to remember. You know, like you do kind of have like an interesting timing on some of these characters, right?
Yeah.
And you do have to wonder like how that occurs.
Yeah, because like if you think about it too, right? Like there's no way that 2 months. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because the way that they paid the artists and the page rates and how fast they could work, they could do that. They could see a book in May and then all of a sudden have their own version 2 months later from scratch. I just think nowadays, like, I don't think that could be done. Like written, concepted, drawn, approved, finalized, printed in 2 months, that'd be wild. Quick shout out though, on Instagram, TikTok Tom, Cross-Eye Comics, or Doug Knight are in the chat. Hey Doug, and quick shout out for TikTok Tom. I just decided to rock this shirt today. Yeah, good coincidence. Okay, this is looking spooky, Keith. What do we got going on here? We got.
I don't know. I just kind of was like, what if like you have Swamp Thing or whatever creature, whatever this is, kind of coming out of the water behind or in front of the Man Thing type of creature. All right. So I don't know. Just seemed like it's kind of an interesting composition. Don't know if it's going to work, but this is the fun about doing this kind of stuff, right? Because you can play around very quickly with these ideas, and at this point, this is probably, I would consider this to be more of a focus doodle, right? Something I'm teaching during my workshops are the spontaneous doodle and the focus doodle. Spontaneous being like something you have absolutely no idea what you're going to do until it comes, whatever lines you start laying down, and then all of a sudden you have something that didn't exist a couple of minutes ago. And then a focused could be just you have an idea of what you want to do, and you're just letting the lines kind of come dictate something, but there is a bit of a structure to it. There's a bit of a reference happening, right? And so once I saw what this was, I was like, ooh, there's a space that could work in the middle of this creature that may be where I can put something else, right? And that's where now I have now I'm seeing something here, and I'm not sure exactly, but I'm going to see if I can figure out how to make something kind of interesting come from this. But again, still not exactly sure what I'm doing, just playing around a little bit, seeing if something works. And if it doesn't work, then so be it.
Like it's interesting because when you before you sort of had defined, I suppose, the surface of the water, my brain was like, oh, cool. So we could get, like, this would look like a really cool horror cover, if, like, a classic one, if either in front of Swamp Thing was then like the creature of the Black Lagoon, so you had the three characters towering over, or if Swamp Thing was holding, forget her name, but the human that he admires greatly. That's where my brain went, but it's cool. Like, I like seeing your process. That being said, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it is Mr. Patel over at TikTok Tom has asked, Keith, do you do all digital work?
No, I'm classically trained, and so actually, you have a piece of my art that is traditionally drawn. It's a hybrid, technically. It's right behind you. It's the man thing. I'm a traditionally trained artist. I learned how to paint, oil, watercolor, acrylic. I learned how to do all different kinds of mediums, like screen printing and clay and all that kind of stuff, woodwork. I've learned a lot of that. I also learned traditional because I grew up around advertising when I was a young person. I grew up around like how to put together traditionally how they used to put magazines and newspapers and things together. So I learned, how to cut and paste and all that kind of stuff. This is pre-Photoshop. But when I was in school, Photoshop was just being introduced into the programs. So I learned a lot of traditional stuff, and then I was learning the nascent digital arts with Photoshop, Illustrator, all the different programs that existed back. PageMaker was one of those that existed back in the day. And now I mainly work digitally. I find that the process for me is pretty comfortable just to work in this format. However, I still like to do traditional art. So, for example, what Konrad just showed you was a hybrid. I drew the line art digitally, and then printed it out in it was blue line, essentially, which is it's not necessary, but back in the day, if when they were taking photos of some kind of image or something, like if you were to draw it, you take a photo, you'd use like a non-photo blue to lay in some of that underline. So when it was photographed, it wouldn't show up. And I still work in that capacity, just habit, I guess. So anyway, I do like to keep myself traditionally in the game. I go out and I will go to like a cafe or someplace where there's people walking around, and I will draw them. And I like to keep a visual journal when I travel of whatever I see. and those types of things kind of help create ideas, create characters, like just keep you warmed up, it does kind of work a different part of the brain, I think, in regards to drawing, because digital drawing, while like there's things I can undo. I don't do undo that often, but I actually I was showing, I think I've shown this before, where I can erase. You see the black. I erased the white into the black, but I like like when you traditionally draw, you actually have to plan things out a little bit more. You have to think about what you're going to be doing. So sometimes, when you make those mistakes traditionally, you have to either live with it or you white it out or something, right? Whereas digital, that's not as much of an issue. But that being said, as I said, I try to keep as much of some of this in the drawing, whether it's a mistake or not. Sometimes it comes out looking really cool, and you just kind of go, oh, well, it's not perfect, but it works, right?
Just happy little accidents.
Exactly. Bob Ross.
Absolutely. I love that. Do forgive me if I say this wrong, but Chetan of TikTok Tom says, I am as old as you. I did cut and paste for my mini comics I did. Awesome.
Okay, yeah. That's something that I didn't do mini comics using that skill set, but I did work for a company where it was a toy company where I had to learn how to create package design. And that was really, have I shown that online before, the Bruce Lee?
I don't even think I've seen it. I know we've talked about it, but I don't think I've seen it.
Okay. So you're going to have to vamp for 30 seconds.
No problem. This is going to be so cool. So previously, Keith and I don't even think on this show, I think on my regular show where I've had him on as a guest, mentioned that he worked in, marketing in a capacity and was responsible for packaging. And this is cool.
So, yeah, here, I'll back up a little bit. It's a little bit worn. It's like the only one I have left, but they're really cool. So I helped design this, and has like a Velcro on it, so you can actually.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that was me. That was my whole thing. That is my claim to fame in regard. There was action figures too. This is like a 18-inch doll or whatever it is. But then also I did like action figures, which had less articulation. I don't have any of those left, unfortunately. But this was really difficult to figure out, like this whole idea of like having it fold out like that, like to create a die line for this and make it because it's expensive when you're having to produce like hundreds of thousands of units of a package design, to spend the money on that kind of like die cut. I mean, that said a lot about the company having faith in my design. I thought that was pretty cool. So anyway, that was my using of like cut and paste and learning how to design packages because packaging is an art to that as well, because it has to be able to fit into certain places like Walmarts and toy stores. You have to. That's also a pretty big box. So you want to be able to, the amount of sales you're going to have offset by how many you can stock in a place, offset by the cost of the product, and all that kind of, like, all those things go into play, which was above my pay grade. But it was one of those things where I had to always have that in mind when I was designing something. Is like, okay, is this going to cost them? Is this going to be cost prohibitive for them? And with that particular toy, I mean, I was surprised they let me get away with the kind of design I did. But so yeah, that's one thing that I'm very, very proud of. I can always talk about, no matter how long I've been involved in the arts. I can be like, I helped design packaging for Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon. Right. So
That's amazing. That's actually so cool. And like to get to see it, awesome. It's also fascinating for me, like, because I've worked retail and customer service quite a fair bit in my lifetime, at chapters, at oh god, well, mostly chapters, a little bit at Home Depot and stuff, and just learning how like the businesses operate, and the types of things, like you said, like packaging has to go in and be accounted for, the product itself. It has to be able to fit on a shelf. So I'm guessing when you design that packaging, they're like, okay, it can only be so wide and so tall because
Yeah.
of the standardized thing that Toys R Us or whatever store wanted to stock them. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I did some other stuff that was, I mean, I guess it's cool, but it wasn't my favorite thing to work on, which was like, I worked on Britney Spears packaging. There was like back in the day when Britney Spears and Sync, Backstreet Boys were like at the top of the charts.
Yeah.
They had all different kinds of toys, and the company I worked for pretty much had I think they had the licensing for all of it. So they were, it was play along toys, and then they ended up getting bought up by Jack Specific. And I don't know if Jack Specific is around anymore, but yeah, anyway, I worked on that kind of stuff, and it's not as exciting, but I mean, I got to see, like, I got some free tickets to see Backstreet Boys.
Oh, that's cool.
They're pretty good, I have to say. It was really just pre cell phones, really. Well, a little bit around that time. So you had, I remember at one moment when the Backstreet Boys are like, okay, everybody take out your lighters. And there weren't a lot of young people that could, were bringing lighters in. So it wasn't, and then people started using some of their phones. So it was like innocent, right? And it was the parents like using their phones or something to get a little bit more light into the all those lights to pop up.
Oh yeah.
For the Backstreet Boys. So anyway,
Wait, I have to ask: is this one of the packages you helped design?
Yes, I didn't. Yeah, so I can't. So when I say help design, they had already had it designed. I may have been like, okay, there's a new, like that's a new clothing setup, so I would have to like change certain details on the packaging to make up for it. Some or like we get like updated on the like maybe the color scheme would be different or something. So like I didn't come into that. The Bruce Lee, I started from the beginning.
Yeah.
Britney Spears was already, all that stuff was happening before I got there. Same thing with Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I had helped, they had different toys with Sabrina, and whenever they had a new product, I would help like design changes in the way that the design of the whatever new project it was, you'd have to redesign the packaging for it.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that is genuinely cool. Like I appreciate like the specific audience that perhaps we're catered to might not be the biggest fans of Britney Spears or whatever, but like for you to be working on a project like that, where like if you've got like, oh, Britney Spears in X outfit, Y outfit, Z outfit, it's like, okay, cool. We need you to go in and redo the imagery on it so that the packaging matches the character and the outfit and all this. Like, I appreciate for you at the time was probably like a lot of like, all right, cool. So like let's make sure this fits right. And yeah, she's wearing the right thing. But like, that's cool, man. Like you're working on some pretty huge stuff.
Yeah. On one side where it was like, they were multi-million album sales with the different boy bands, or Christina Aguilera, or, Britney Spears, whoever, Mandy Moore. We had the licensing for her, and like for me, it's just more, I guess, interest wasn't my thing. And that I think that's more, I guess, where I'm saying, like, it was cool that I was part of it, but the fact that what it was itself wasn't really the most exciting thing for me.
Fair.
Sabrina was a little bit cooler, I thought, because it was more cartoony. So I thought that was that for me was a little bit more interesting. But anyway, now that I can look back on it, and I have some fondness for the company that I worked for. It was a pretty good company, and what I was doing. I mean, it was a lot of work, but I learned a lot from that. I learned how to work really hard and to work under a lot of stress for days on end. Working under deadline, making sure that whatever you're putting out there has to be perfect, because any mistakes that could cost the company millions of dollars. Right.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah. So there were some things that I dealt with that really you learn about yourself, right, when you're under that kind of stress. And if you get through it, then it's like, okay, well, then I know I can deal with high stress situations if I need to, right? So
interesting. One thing that I want to ask now, because you're fairly into this sketch, but it's something that always fascinates me is how do I explain this? Basically, like, so for Man-Thing's face, you are very much drawing a completely flat image, and based on the direction of things, you're implying a 3D shape, right? Which is like the key thing for drawing good art, almost, is being able to emulate and lie to make things look right. So the way that you've drawn and structured Man-Thing's brow line and like the things coming off of his face, how do you do that? Like, what's the trick to that to make that implied lie work, so that my brain goes, oh, so he's got like a snout kind of thing, and then he's got like the tube things with a handful of white lines?
Trial and error.
Love it.
I don't know if you noticed, but I was kind of noodling around with like how many lines to put in, how many to take out. It's trial and error. It's if I could have kept on going and adding more, like cross hatching type stuff, and who knows, I may do that. Actually, that doesn't look too bad when I do that. But it's just, you just look at it. You have to understand form. You have to understand how light hits things. If you think about shapes, and you think about what shapes make up something to make it recognizable. You have to have strong silhouettes to do that kind of thing, right? So all those things, there's a lot. This is a lot of years of schooling, a lot of years of practice and trial and error, and seeing. I guess I'm still working on it. I can't say that like my journey is completed in that way, but I don't know. The fun about doing this process where I'm working digitally like this, where I can like add and subtract, is that if it doesn't work, it's not a big deal. I can just erase it, really, or add ink black to it very quickly. I can look at it, and if it doesn't feel right to me, then I can just let it go, right? And go, okay, that feels better, right? There's something about that. So it's really being able to do something where you're not married to it, like you're not attached to what you're doing. If you get too connected with what you're doing, you're going to fall in love with something, and sometimes it's hard to see that there are mistakes that are not mistakes you want to keep in there. There's other things too, like like let's say I walk away from this, and then I come back to it a week from now, I may see it completely differently and go, oh, what was I thinking there? That doesn't make any sense. Or it'll still feel good to me, right? You know, if you have a deadline, unfortunately, you don't have a luxury sometimes to be able to do that kind of thing. But I mean, okay, so for example, contour. I don't know if you're familiar with contour, but it's kind of like, you know, this kind of thing here. It's what the lines of something. If you were to draw lines around what the shape of it would be to give it a form, right? So now all of a sudden, the contours of this kind of make that arm pop out a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It kind of looks cool actually now that I've done it, but you know, I don't know. I may not keep that actually. But you know, so there's that kind of stuff. There's light and dark, making sure that there's a nice balance of like negative and positive space. A lot of this is just going to school, reading books, practice, just looking what other artists do and kind of trying to figure out how they've done it and then emulating it. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not. Some of these decisions you make are also instinctual. One of the reasons why I like the doodling is because you're creating something that just you don't know what it is, and then you just it starts sparking your imagination, and now all of a sudden, because we have reference in our I think a lot of us do, not everybody has reference in our brains, right? We take in things all the time. It's just that we don't always know how to access it. We don't always know how to retrieve an image that we have. Like if you're like, I want to draw the swamp thing, you know, you've seen it before, but you may not actually be able to recall it because you haven't drawn it before. Now, maybe, you know, like if you start doodling and then you go, oh, this kind of looks like swamp thing. I think this feels right. Now you have a reference you can use, and you can try to work from that to see if you can get closer. Of course, you can always use real reference, but you know, so a lot of this is you actually have skill sets within you that you may not realize until you activate them in some ways. So that's why when I talk about doodling, I'm very passionate about it, because doodling really activates the imagination in people, and I think it unlocks what that imagination is, and unlocks reference you have in your head for things. You know, you go, oh, this kind of looks like this character, and you're like, I've never drawn this character before. How do I know how to draw Kermit the Frog if I've never drawn him? But you've seen Kermit the Frog, and now you just doodle it, and you're like, whoa, that kind of looks like Kermit, and you can start to work on that. So you're using it as a reference from something that didn't exist prior. So, you know, like knowing, I'm not quite answering your question, I guess. But, you know, like knowing what to put in, what to leave out. I'm using this as a reference, and I'm looking at it going, does this look right to me? Is this far enough? It bothering me? Because I keep on looking at it going, maybe if I just erase a little bit more, you can still tell what it is, but you may go, maybe I need to make it a little bit more defined still, right? So, you know, and then I look at it and go, well, that feels more like what I've seen before, and therefore I think other people are probably going to see the same thing. And this is a little bit of trust fall. I don't know if everybody's going to see the same thing that I'm doing in the way I see it, and a lot of that comes through practice of creating comics, releasing comics, and having people read it, and not coming back to you going, I don't understand any of what I was reading. None of the like your characters weren't it didn't make any sense to me, right? You go, oh, okay, well then maybe I have to think about like drawing characters a little bit more clearly if people are not understanding what's happening. You know, but it's it's so that's part of it. It's putting your stuff or your art out there, and people responding to it. And if they're sometimes they see things that you don't see, which is kind of cool. You have to be okay with people kind of noticing certain elements of your art that weren't your intention.
Yeah.
And so, what you're seeing here, and maybe it's because your eyes and the pathways from, your senses, your eyes, have watched me draw enough that you kind of get it.
Yeah.
You may get it more than somebody that's never seen my art and looks at my art and goes, what is it I don't really see what you're drawing.
Oh, fair.
Right? They may not have reference for Man Thing or Swamp Thing. So for them, they're going to look at it and go, I'm not seeing it because I don't know what I'm looking at here.
Interesting.
So, that's also a possibility. Some people have limited reference to these things. A younger person may not understand what you're doing because it's unfamiliar to them. And then somebody who, knows what you're doing more intimately may see things much clearer, much more quickly. So that's another factor too, right? These are all symbols, right? So people have language. If you ever notice somebody who starts to read comic books and they don't always know where their eyes should go because they're not familiar with the process of like how to read a comic. You have to kind of, it is something you have to teach. And so because of that, somebody may not, I've shown comics to people that I've drawn who never really read a comic book before. And earlier on, at least, they were like, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. My wife, who doesn't really know a lot of comics, she's become somewhat familiar with the language of comics. I'll show her my work, and if she understands what's happening, then I know it's pretty clear.
Right on.
But again, it's one of those things where somebody who isn't familiar with the symbols and they may not see the same thing. They may not understand what they're looking at. Their visual language skills are not as attuned with the particular art that you're showing them, right? So it is something that if you're an artist or a creator who has been around for a while and people are very familiar with the language of the art you create, you can get away with getting more abstract with what you do, because I think people will recognize it much faster otherwise, or they're more sophisticated, I think. And also the other part of it too is some artists, like you look at an Alex Toth type who was all about the minimalist type of line use. He was a master at that, but a lot of that was trial and error of going, is this line necessary? No, or yes, right? And that's just through years and years of practicing it. And so people, it's kind of a dual. It's like people who've gone along for the Alex Toth ride are more familiar with what he does, therefore they can kind of see it and get on board with it really easily. And then also he's become a master at it, so he knows he has a really good sense of what is working and what isn't working. So it's probably going to be both. But it is one of those things where I'm still going to play around with this like negative and positive space, because I'm still not sure what needs to be put in there and what doesn't. Now, the other part of this too is that story is important, and there's a story kind of being told here. But if you don't really have a story in mind for this, there's nothing that you don't know what's happening on the page, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you to figure out what to keep in and what to leave, because you're not sure. Because I have, I'm looking at this going, well, maybe he's backlit, so you can kind of see that, there's going to be you're going to see some of that light kind of hitting his back and going and curving over some of those forms. But then that kind of defies a little bit of the composition, because then the creature that's in front of him isn't backlit. It would be in complete darkness, but you're cheating it to create a cool looking composition, right? Or there could be hypothetically another light hitting the front somewhere. And, again, if that's the case, then that would allow for maybe some of this, line, some of the line work in the center of the character to show up a bit more, because some of that front light is hitting the front of the character, right? Again, it's just some cheats you can create just to you're manipulating the viewer, so you can decide where if you're breaking rules, because it's to help tell the story versus to be completely realistic, right? Being completely realistic isn't always necessary, as long as it doesn't throw the reader out, as long as they're not looking at it going, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like the way that they're doing that.
Yeah. In fact, often not. I find being unrealistic is good.
Yeah, exactly. So again, there's not the question you asked, there's a lot to it. And I'm trying to touch on some of what it could be that would, help me to figure out whether to leave something in or not. So storytelling, being schooled in regards to, all the different types of skill sets you need to create a composition, trial and error, familiarity with the subject, or the person viewing it being familiar with it, all that kind of stuff, right? So, and doing this yourself, it could be frustrating, of course, and that's why, if you are okay just failing, you have to learn to get out of your way and just go, this is just about my journey, and it's okay that this isn't working correctly. And that's one of unfortunately, it's one of the greatest things that prevent artists or potential artists from moving past the initial beginning stages of art, is that they're so they get so stuck on making things the way that they want them to look, and not being able to achieve that it can be very soul crushing. So you have to be able to learn that failure is okay, that trial and error it's huge. That's part of it. That is how you grow as an artist. I've talked about this before. And so talking about trial and error, that's failure and success, right? It's like, okay, this is not working, this is working, this is not working, this is working, right? It's oftentimes a lot of not working to get to, this kind of works, I kind of like this, and then hoping that you can if you keep on pushing through some of those like failures, you're going to have a lot of them, that you eventually will get to a point where you enjoy what you're doing, and you're not so concerned with, well, it's, first of all, it's looking more like the way you want it to look. Secondly, you're able to finish things. That's important, right?
Big time.
You get it to a place where you can actually say, oh, it's complete, and I can move on to the next thing, right? So.
Like for me, what I'm enjoying out of this, like having studied psychology and perception and like how the brain works a bit, coupled with my appreciation for the medium of comics, especially when it comes to things like leading the eye and how to read comics. There's two things that are blowing my mind about this illustration you're doing, and I'll call it an illustration. One is, whether you've done it intentionally, consciously, or just for sake of how layout works, what I'm appreciating is you started with a white page and then you drew a black figure, and that immediately is high contrast. So that wants all of your attention now wants to go to the contrasting thing. So it's like, oh, what's this figure? You've then made the eyes like white and like strongly, which further draws you right to the eyes because you've gone like white, black, white, contrast, contrast, contrast. And then what I think is super cool is by then making Swamp Thing's head white and like at its core, you're now pulling the eye down, and then you've added the feet.
Mm-hmm. Oh, your sound went out. There we go.
Awesome.
There we go. The last thing I heard was, and then you let the feet.
Oh, so then you let the shadow of the feet be the contrast, right? The black shadow on the white feet. So now you've got your eye, you've got the reader's eye immediately going from Man-Thing's eyes to his body to Swamp Thing's head to Swamp Thing's feet, which I just think is amazing. And then what actually has blown my mind, because I've watched you this whole time intently while you're drawing this, you've managed to draw the ripples in the water and the reflection of Man-Thing's fingers on the water. I never even noticed that, because I don't think it was real until you put like just that curved thin line in there to be like the ripple on the water. And then it, again, art is essentially lying to your senses. And now I'm seeing this reflection in the water. And it's just like, Keith, I didn't even see you do that. And yet it's right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, was there a question or was that just...
No, it was just a kind of a comment. Like, it was awesome. And I appreciate, like, the way that art, and it sounds like it's really negative, but it's not. I love that it works. The way that art and the way that you are lying to me beautifully, creating this 3D looking, masterfully rendered thing out of just black and white ink, or black and white pixels, I guess. Now, another thought I had, you were talking about, I think it had to do with like the packaging you were talking about and all that stuff. One thing that came to mind was, readability, and my brain started going, well, yeah, so like someone who's read like Dave McKean and understands it will be able to withhold and understand and deal with more abstract stuff. So my brain started going, well, what if that's why DC and Marvel tend to have a pretty rigid style? Because from like a marketing perspective, they have a massively popular style that's readable, and so more people will see it and understand it and buy it, and that kind of dictates comic art. And that's how like me growing up, I was a big fan of Jim Lee because it's Jim Lee. But again, he's just got a really refined comic booky, detailed style, and it's very readable. And then my brain keeps pursuing that. And goes, well, okay, well, what about now? Like, who would I say like was inspired by him at some point? And my brain goes to, at least stylistically, I merge him with Jorge Jimenez, I believe his name is. Massively popular guy at DC right now. Does fantastic work. Has a wicked reference of the father-son Kamehameha in a Superman comic, which I loved. But like, obviously they're not the same, but there's a similarity in style there that is highly readable. And I'm like, interesting. So just some of the stuff you were saying sort of bouncing around in my head, and I'm like, well, that's probably why comic book style is the way it is. Because if you said someone like, hey, picture a comic book, they're probably all going to picture in pop culture something along the lines of Marvel or DC, and that my brain just kind of exploded on that.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because if you think about any of the, you're talking about Dave McKean, and that made me automatically go to Sandman and Vertigo. And one of the things that that I think about in regards to what you're saying is that with Vertigo, they were able to take some risks with storytelling that they can't really do with mainstream, because mainstream, to your point, kind of it's mainstream. It's pop culture. It's got to reach across the widest swath of people. Whereas Vertigo is a very distinct style and story that appeals to a smaller group of people. it could have been very popular. It was very popular, but I'm sure their sales were not as big. I mean, I actually I can't speak to this, but I don't know if their sales were necessarily as big as, let's say, Superman sales were. But
I would assume not. I know they did very well, but I would assume not.
yeah, so and some of the I've reread Sandman recently, and going back to some of the art, some of it was really not. I can't say that it was risk. There was a lot of risk taking being done, and some of it was a little hard to follow, if I had to be honest. But
Yeah.
they were taking risks, which I appreciated. So again, some of these things aren't going to work. Integrating, like they would integrate multiple lettering styles in a story with the art, with laying out art in a very different way than the traditional grid system. And when it worked really, really well, and it was beautiful. The story was amazing, and sometimes it didn't work. And it was one of those things where like it just, I don't know if I think that's why you have stuff like Image and some of these books that are some of these publishers that are taking risks on story, artists that are telling stories in more unique ways than the more traditional mainstream ways, right? Because that's the only way that we're going to grow and expand and teach people who are not familiar with the language of comic book storytelling or storytelling in general. If you introduce them to something that's just like really different, then they'll be able to remember that and make and then when they see something else that's very different, they'll hopefully be able to make that connection again, right? Their language will expand, right? So it's important for us to be able to have people jump from the mainstream stuff to the more indie style, I guess is what we can call it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like one thing for me, I remember so vividly is Arkham Asylum, written by Grant Morrison and done like art by Dave McKean. And for me, like McKean will forever be probably one of my favorite comic artists, or artists in general, I suppose I should say, because he's not strictly comics. And the funny thing is, to this day, like I have a first edition of it. When I got my copy, I was like, "Oh my god, first edition, haha!" I was like, it's a cherished thing I have. But it's funny because like people have asked me, "So what's the book about?" Because they've played like maybe the video games. Like, what is Arkham Asylum about? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know. I know the Joker gets out. He's in the asylum. He's like torturing. I think he like jams a pencil through someone's eye over the phone, which makes Gordon send Batman in because they're finally like, oh my god, he's killing people, go get him. And then I have no clue what that book is about, but the art throughout that book is mind crushingly good. And even like when I go reread it now, I'm like, oh my god, like it was off the wall. It was trying to do weird stuff to the characters. Like the Madonna bra that the Joker had on. I remember they did, or Dave McKean drew Killer Croc, but like as almost a giant monitor lizard instead of like an alligator. It was a whole thing, and I just remember falling in love with it and being like, this is interesting, this is different. And I'm wondering if a book like that and an artist like Dave McKean is the reason why people like myself will make the jump from Batman to indie or something not mainstream, because the art is so different.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that you're exactly right. When I was younger, I think I really only had an understanding of Marvel and DC, and then I started to get bored with it after a while when I was a teenager. And I think that's natural, right? When you get to a certain age, your brain is developing and exploring, and you're pushing boundaries, right? Within yourself and within the people around you are much more different than what you were used to when you were a little kid, right? So you're constantly pushing boundaries when you start to develop. Your brain starts to develop in your teens and early 20s, and so I think there is something to wanting to search for stories that are different than what you've seen over and over and over again. And so for me, I was pretty diehard Marvel and DC for a good, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, probably until I was like 16, 17, 18. And then I started, people would tell me about, Love and Rockets or Stray Bullets or something like that. I'd be like, I don't know. That doesn't sound that interesting to me. And then I discovered Strangers in Paradise and Bone and some of the Hellboy, like some of the stuff from the mid to late 90s. I started getting into more indie stuff and realizing that I really liked this new language of symbols I was seeing. For me, some of that looked more like the way I was drawing, right? And
interesting.
And and when I say that, this is a young person's naivety and insecurities and immaturity going where, if this person can draw this way, which doesn't look like a Marvel or DC way of drawing it, then maybe I can do it. Now, of course, what I was looking at was somebody drawing with a high skill set. It's just that maybe it deceptively looked like it was something that somebody who didn't have as much skills could do. And so that's at least inspired me to go, well, because like one of the things I liked about Terry Moore, and he just drew faces and in a way that felt real. People, the women's bodies were real, the gestures were real, and I always drew like that to the degree I had a real hard time drawing like super heroic poses and dynamic poses that were what you would see in Marvel and DC. It was just something that I had a difficult time with. But Strangers in Paradise was like real people having conversations. And I'm like, well, I kind of like drawing stuff. As I said, I like going out and sketching people. And that's what this type of stuff I was drawing. Now, of course, his skill set at being able to draw people is just bar none. I mean, you get emotion, the way he draws emotion on people's faces. I wasn't seeing that anywhere other than with Kevin McGuire from the Justice League International. But anyway, so like that inspired me. That made me realize, well, maybe there is a place for me to do comic books. Again, it's kind of deceptive because what he was doing was brilliant, but it just gave me hope, I guess. And then as I explored more and more of the indie stuff to see the range of what you could do, there are some. It's maybe the skill wasn't there when it came to being able to draw anatomy with some of these artists or creators, comic creators. But the way they told stories was really well done. Yeah. And I realized then that it's not about technical. It's about the emotional, the connection, the symbols you're using to connect the reader so that they are on board. You're manipulating them in a way, that makes them want to keep on reading. And that I was seeing in some of the indie stuff. Again, that gave me inspiration to keep on going my journey to get into comic books.
I love it. Like it's fascinating, and later on, maybe in our next show, I want to talk to you about exactly what you mean, because I believe I understand, but for myself, also the folks watching, I would love for you to further explore and flesh out what you mean when you're saying the symbols that you're teaching people. That being said, I appreciate it's also 40 seconds left in our hour. So Keith, it has been again an absolute pleasure. I will pop up your Man Thing versus Swamp Thing cover, or who knows, maybe Man Thing's just going to give them a really nice back rub.
They're just playing in the swamp together.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, absolutely, Keith. It was great to chat with you again. 2 weeks from today, let's do it again. And is there anything out there that you want to promote that people can get their hands on or look out for from yourself?
Yeah, let me just bring up my calendar here. So if anybody is living in the Newmarket area and they want to learn about comic books, on April 6th, I am hosting a comic book workshop with Howard Wong at Wayside Comics and Cocktails in Newmarket from 11 to 2. To get involved with that, you can go to my my Facebook or Instagram, or you can message me on Facebook or Instagram, Keith Grachow, and ask about it. It's $100 plus tax for the workshop, but you're going to be able, if you're into comic books and you want to create your own comic, or you're in the middle of creating your own comic and you're going, how do I get to the next level? I need somebody else's set of eyes with experience to help get me there. Howard and I can do that. Howard's a fantastic writer. He's worked for Image and Marvel. And then, you've seen what I can do art-wise. So we can, both of us together, we can kind of help guide you along to get you to wherever you want to go with your comic book.
Love it. You've heard it here, folks. Go get your tickets. Ask specific questions. By God, be specific, so that Keith can give you some really good feedback, because from chilling out with us for the hour, he's fantastic at it, at explaining his ideas. And he's amazing at making comics. So tap into that resource. But that being said, Keith, absolutely, it was great hanging out with you again. And we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2. Collect